Got it.
All right. Gary Derenfeld here, yoursocialworker.com. I am with, I was going to say a lifelong friend. It's 34 years, Pat,
Hmm.
that we've known each other. I'm 50, 67. You're somewhere around the same, I think. All right, keep it a secret.
Rub it
And
in.
so, if not lifelong friends, most of our life friends. Pat is Mohawk, Wolf Clan from Six Nations, Ontario. He is a pipe carrier, sweat lodge keeper, drummer. Uh, oh, screw all that. You're just a good friend of mine who happens to be Indigenous. And Pat, anything or most of what I know about First Nations peoples and Indigenous culture, I actually owe to you and talking with you and you graciously letting me into your life and being a part of your life. Um, Ours is a relationship I cherish. So just to let you know that, I just got to move my camera around here a bit. Okay. I cherish. And you do what I do. You counsel. You meet with people whose lives are troubled and see if you can't help them find a way to turn that around. And you do that primarily for Indigenous persons, although not exclusively, but primarily. I'm this white Caucasian um, colonialized guy. I work periodically with Indigenous persons, certainly not exclusively, but periodically. You've been a great help to me in my practice working with Indigenous persons. And so I wanted to meet with you today because I'm not unique. There are other white, maybe persons of color as well, but non Indigenous persons in counseling roles working with First Nations peoples, Indigenous peoples. I wanted to hear from you what you think we need to know in order to be more effective in our work with Indigenous persons. Pat, thanks for being with me today.
Thank you, Gary. I just want to talk about that Mohawk thing.
Please.
Yeah, I'm Mohawk. I'm from Six Nations. And what I know about that is that uh, over the years, uh, since colonization started, uh, being Mohawk was the thing for us. Being Mohawk was the thing for me. And what I found with that over the years is that it's pretty limited. It's pretty limited because there's so many other nations involved in our existence. With within ourselves, we have the five nations that brought up the, the constitutions of the Iroquois people. With that, branching out to other nations with the invitation to come and live under this peace, we're not in isolation. We've been able to put together five distinct nations, five distinct cultures come together to create this great peace that we talk about in our territory. And all of those were in consideration of past experience, uh, acknowledging the wisdom from each one of those nations and bring it forward to form our own constitution. It's the constitution of the five nations, the Iroquois people. And there was a lot of respect for knowledge and blood memory, etc. And I think that's one of the things that's failing the Canadian society, because we're not included. We're not included in that formation of Canadian society. That we weren't acknowledged for the wisdom that we bring forward, the civilization, if you will, prior to. And I know that I've spent a lot of time going from nation to nation to nation, hitchhiking across Canada, United States, to learn ceremonies, to learn I guess the customs from that territory. And when I did that, it only fertilized my own. It helped my own to grow, so I could understand and appreciate our own culture here, on being part of the Iroquois Nation and being a Mohawk. It helped me to appreciate the ceremonies that help us to uh, let go of the past, to recognize that the present is the most important time for us, to be able to turn around and plan 7 generations after ourselves. I carry that. I carry that knowledge. I carry that wisdom of grandfathers that say that you and I, our relationship is going to affect 7 generations after ourselves. So I have to be totally committed to that. I have to be totally committed to being my healthiest self, physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. That's been taken away from us for the past 250 years through residential schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to the point of it's now an outside concept, that civilization is not part of who we are. Now we have to learn this new civilization. We have to learn these new behaviors. We have to, we're starting over again to bring all of that back so that we can have self-esteem as an Aboriginal person, as an Aboriginal family member, as an Aboriginal community member. And I remember hearing years ago that, one of the governments, whether it's Canadian or American governments, noted that to be an Iroquois man, it took a lot of commitment. It took a lot of change to make us Canadian or American. Now, my grandfathers turned down the offer for education because we knew that it was going to change our thinking. It was going to change our spiritual connection. They knew it was going to change our whole being. And those are the kinds of things that I like to bring forward when I'm dealing with non-Aboriginals in our community, whether they're helpers or whether they're government officials, or I like them to take a look at, we recognize that we're colonized. We recognize the effects of colonization. Do you? Do you recognize that you're part of that? Do you recognize that at one time your people, when you follow your people back to your original country or the original village, are also colonized? At one time, we all shared the same existence. We all shared the wisdom of the universe, if you will. When you think about our connection to the earth, connection to the sea, connection to the air, connected. We were very connected. Now, there's a meme on Facebook, and I find it pretty entertaining. There's a non-native sitting cross-legged with an elder around a fire, and the non-native saying, well, where did we go wrong? Now, the native looked at him and said, you've lost your spiritual connection. Now, I enjoyed that because that's what I see from sitting outside of the Canadian society, sitting outside of the colonization. I see that where the spiritual connection is lost, that spiritual connection to all around us. In our prayers, when we leave the sweat lodge or in the sweat lodge, we say all our relations, all my relations, and we take into consideration every connection that we have to the earth. Now, our prayers at home on the Six Nations is that when we have an opening to a meeting or opening to a gathering, the opening can take anywhere from a day to 2 days, just acknowledging our connection to the earth and the rest of the universe, including the stars, etc. It's it's never been lost, but it has been stunted. It has been stunted in our rites of passage, where trauma has hit us so bad that our spirit stopped growing. Physically, we get to be an adult. Emotionally, where the emotion and the spirit stopped around the same time, and mentally somewhere in between. I know that, and in our teachings we know that, but that has been absent for quite a while. So it's coming back into our reality. Uh, that's why we have men who are very aggressive, very abusive, and I ask people, is that adult behavior? Women the same way. Is that adult behavior? Now, behaviors are taught to us at a very young age. I liken it to like, sometimes I like to think contemporary. We're like little computers, and we're programmed to behave to certain situations at a very young age, hence the immature behaviors. So if we can deal with those, I don't want to sound mystical, but it's called spirit retrieval where I come from, where we go back to the original trauma and nurse the spirit forward, hence the emotions forward.
If I can jump in, here's what comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
Myself as a non-Indigenous person, if I'm working with an Indigenous person, I need to resist helping you live in my white world to improve your behavior or mood, whatever. What I really need to do is help you connect better to your roots, your world, your spirituality. From there, you may find peace and behavior may take care of itself.
I appreciate that, and I know, Gary, you come from that. But there are helpers and social workers that come the from the colonies, and their job is to make us good little Canadians. I worked for Secretary of State years ago. And my job in Secretary of State, along with all the other workers, was to provide resources for organizational capacity for them to become better Canadians. That was the epitome of the colonizations, working as Secretary of State. Then I went to work for
that is so incongruent with how I know you and who you are.
And then I went to work for employment and immigration, if you will. So that I'm dating myself, but it shows the both of those organizations are the epitome of colonization.
Yeah.
With
You got
all
to
the
fit
good.
into Canadian culture. And when you're Aboriginal, what about yours?
Hmm. Hmm. And that's why I find it necessary to have people follow back to their place of origin, because that did not exist at one time. Only the healthy uh, absorption into the family and community. I know that. I know that when I go over to when if I go to Europe, I'm going to find those little villages that are still living that way. And the further I get into the civilization of the cities, etc., you can see
Civilization.
you can see the colonization that goes along with it. And I think all of those things have to be taken into consideration when we're working with uh, people from a different race. I remember McMaster University at one time was adamant about do not ask emotional questions, do not delve into the emotions unless you're prepared for it. I think that they did a lot more damage in communicating with Aboriginal people with that concept than not attending it at all, because that was instilling that negative way of dealing with Aboriginal people. I hope that makes it makes a little bit of sense, because it's I grew up watching that from a distance.
Well, it's easier to colonize you, I guess, if I cut you off from some of those intense feelings of loss, shame, anger. Yeah.
I was always told that when I go into somebody else's village, make friends with the old women first. They'll open the door or close the door on you. It doesn't seem like a lot, but when I go from one village to another village across Canada, they are the doors. They are the doorkeepers, and it made me behave. It made me be aware of my behaviors and my personal intent of going into that territory.
Hmm.
We've got ceremonies that prepare us for going into another person's territory, and that the whole intent and purpose is to again.
Hang on. Like,
Yeah.
you talk and things go clickety click for me.
Mhm.
Your your sentence. We have ceremonies to prepare us to go into other people's territories. And I'm just, as a social worker, what do we do to prepare ourselves to working with an Indigenous Aboriginal person? Or do we just jump in like it's just another person, just another client? How do we prepare? What is in our mind? What are we thinking about? How does this person's experience differ from my own? I got to tell you, personally, quite often, almost always, if I'm working with persons of color, I look at them and say, I just want to point out the obvious. I'm a white guy. I'm an old, privileged white guy. And I'm talking with you. And that for me, that's the elephant in the room. I want to acknowledge that from the get go.
That's really important, but that's partial to what I was talking about earlier about leaving our garbage outside the village, our intent outside the village. Uh, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I'll know that. Leave that outside and let's practice the culture from within that village, knowing that within that village they already know what their problem is, and our job is just to help them clear the fog so they can identify it and own it. Identify, own it, and move forward by recognizing the behavior that needs to be taken care of. And I think that's really important. If not, we're imposing And if there's one thing that Aboriginal people will fight against is imposition.
Mm,
That's colony all the way. Imposition.
mm-hmm.
Now, where am I going with that part? Because I think it's really nothing more than respect, that we have everything that we need in our civilization to deal with what we have to deal with. Here's my plan from the inside out and not from the outside in. When you come in with your plan to fix our problem, where's the commitment? The commitment comes from myself to make the change that's needed for myself and not for you or your plans. Your plans may be good. Your plans may be very, very good. But it has to be my plan without judgment, with encouragement from your perspective, resources from your perspective. And it's usually dollar bill. It's usually economics. If we had the money, now they say if it takes us 7 years to walk into a bush, it's going to take us 7 years to walk back out. And I think that's really important, that we got 150 years of those types of abuses, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. It's going to take us 250 years to get back to where we need to get with our culture, with our civilization. And I think you're going to find that around the world, the indigenous people are standing up with their civilization and showing how healthy it is all the way around, without the interference of the colonies. I really believe that. I think there's a lot more consideration given to indigenous wisdoms and indigenous knowledge, indigenous civilizations. There's a lot more eyes opening to the structures that were already here.
I do see that shift. I do. I agree. It's not that it isn't met with conflict from the colonizers, but I do see that shift. I started our conversation wondering, what does a person like me, and I'm still going to repeat, this white colonized 67-year-old male with privilege, what does a person like me or my colleagues who do this work and are similarly colonized, what do we need to know if we are going to work with First Nations, Indigenous, Aboriginal peoples? Part of my takeaway from our conversation is preparation, and part of that preparation is a much deeper, broader appreciation excuse me, of the history and worldview of the Aboriginal person, such that we can help them connect to themselves in their culture. Because a lot of the dis-ease is a disconnect from that, and it comes out as behavior, or having had to cope with the atrocities and abuses of the past. But I guess the biggest takeaway is a profound appreciation of that history and difference in worldview, so that we can connect with that person where they are, and also connect them to who they are at their core. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you're going in the right direction. what I like about our relationship is that you are Gary. You know who you are. You know where you come from. You know the pain of your past. You know the pain of your family and community connections. You know that, and bringing that forward, you also appreciate my experience. I think that when we come in with the book knowledge that the educational system gives you is pretty limited on to true relationships, because what you're getting is an intellectual stimulation as opposed to the whole, and we hear this more often than not, the holistic approaches in dealing with someone physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally. I know a lot. I've seen people who know a lot, but spiritually drained, emotionally defunct, mentally, and that's kind of scary. But knowing yourself before you deal with people from a different area, and I think that's really important. The respect part, uh, you know, we talk about respect, but the true definition of respect is to re-look. There's an old saying that do not criticize or judge anybody till you've walked a mile in their moccasins. It has changed over the years to do not criticize or judge anybody until you walked a mile in their moccasins. That way, you're a mile away from them and you have their moccasins. I think that has an awful lot of value to the things that we're talking about here. I think it's really important for us to know ourselves before we really think that we can help somebody else. In our way, you can only take people as far as you've been yourself. How healthy are you? How healthy are your relationships? And are you carrying a lot of your old pain forward? Especially when an Aboriginal person is very angry. We've just been given license to be angry since the 60s. And a lot of that anger is still there and still coming out. I have a right to be angry, but I'm not angry at you. Now, when the average non-native person sees that, including the institutions out there like the police and the lawyers,
yeah,
and
that
judges,
immediately came to mind.
yeah, yeah,
It's personalized.
yeah, and just think, that's only anger, but what is shame? We know that we are Canada's shame. We know that.
What a statement you just made. Wow. We know we are Canada's shame. What a statement you just made. And we all want to hide our shame.
Yeah. Yeah. So as long as you keep pointing your finger at us, you don't have to take a look at yourself. Now that shows us the necessity of ceremony before entering village. Leave your shit outside. Leave your shame, leave your fears and your angers outside, because we're dealing with this issue over here. Clear our minds and our spirit and our emotions so that we can be there holistically to deal with what we're dealing with.
That's excuse me for a minute for digressing, but my understanding is that is in part the function of the smudging ceremony.
Yeah.
Is that, do I have that?
Yeah, ownership.
to open our minds, our ears, our eyes, to
Yeah.
be of good mind.
And you know, that just scratches the surface, right? Uh, we're just getting back into the concept of medicines and the medicine's power. The medicine don't have the power until we give it the power, the consideration of how it's helping us. And all it's doing is helping us to comb our minds,
Comb our
our
minds.
eyes,
What a
our
concept.
ears, to comb all of that out so that we can negotiate at this moment. Uh, it's a revelation to our people again. So, in order for us to really understand that, how do we convey that out to the outside world that's coming in with their good intentions? And I think that's the world view, the indigenous world view, as opposed to the colonial world view. So when I hear,
I,
yeah,
I,
go ahead.
you triggered a memory for me. Trigger in a good way. Um, Earlier in my career, an Aboriginal First Nations persons that I worked with um, smudged with me before our meeting and explained the value and the purpose. And honestly, from my perspective, I thought, oh, how nice, I'm being included in this. I had no depth of understanding or appreciation of what it meant. Over the years, and even now with this conversation, my appreciation for the meaning of that as a ritual, as ceremony, um, is deeper still. We're combing our mind. We're combing out the tangles. Um, that is a metaphor or an image that will really stick with me. Thank you for that.
Oh, you're more than welcome. That's the spiritual connection that I was talking about earlier. Is that we all have those practices that we lost the full meaning of,
Mm.
lighting the candles, uh, you know, all those little things that are looked at as good luck tokens when somebody's going off to sea. They do something or say something to acknowledge for what they're doing. That's the spiritual connection. I know it's hard to put those things together immediately because, when I looked at my ceremonies, they were just ceremonies. It was just an act. It was just an exercise.
Well, that's how it
Moving
felt
up.
originally the first time I participated in that. And,
Mm-hmm.
in all candor, I didn't have the uh, I didn't I didn't have a connection to it or an understanding. And over time, like I said, it's developed. But I'm hearing from you that it's similar for many Aboriginal persons because it's been beat out of them and they weren't allowed these practices for generations. And therein comes disease, dis-ease. And it's in the reconnecting to that, connecting to their spiritual, connecting that health can be um, facilitated.
And so much we learn from other people's display and actions in their ceremonies, to see the effects that those ceremonies have on the people going into their territory really mirrored back to me. And what I've been told, that uh, any of our teachings are just a mirror for those outside of ourselves to take a look within themselves. And I think that's where we're going with all of this. For for the average Canadian person to look at yourself first. Know who you are before you think you can come in and make changes in my community and within myself. Do we have that? And your introduction when you're dealing with an Aboriginal person is, look, I'm just a white guy. I know nothing. And the humble approach is where we all need to be, not with the authoritative approaches that come with colonization and mandate. I work with an organization in Toronto that started out as an advocacy program to help Native people deal with issues from in a city perspective. And they did a great job because they were working for the people and they were the people. As that agency grew, again, it goes back to the monetary, that agency became mandated. And when that mandate came in, the whole concept changed. It's now accountable to the funding source as opposed to the people. And the frontline workers are abandoned out in all of that. So we know this. We know this. We've been showed this for 250 years. And we're strong enough to accept our responsibilities in it. You as a Canadian, not you as a Canadian, but as a Canadian, do you know your responsibilities in it? Do you recognize the impact that you bring, other than power? And we know that power is really easy to become an addiction
and to abuse. So we can go on forever and ever.
Oh yeah. I can't even pretend that this would take a minute or two.
We've been around somewhere around 35, 40 minutes. So I am going to bring us to a close, only knowing that this is a finite experience as well. So I apologize for that. You always move me in a couple of ways. One is emotionally, you stir me. And the other is in part intellectually. That when I thought I saw things here, now I see things there. Maybe in part naively, because I can still be naive. I thought I'd give you a call, get on the Zoom with you, and for the sake of Aboriginal, First Nations, Indigenous persons, have a conversation with you about how we as the helpers on this side who may interface, what do we need to know in order to be more constructive, be more helpful? There was part of me that was thinking, oh, I'm going to hear number 1, number 2, number 3, right? That's my naivety. What you've given me is such a macro perspective of where we have to be in terms of our preparation to meet with and work with an Indigenous person, to have a profound appreciation that my just showing up represents colonization. My impact just for showing up can already be a challenge for the Indigenous person. Which is why I like to acknowledge that right from the get-go, so that we can put it out there and say, where are we with this? How are we? How are we going to meet? I'm so grateful that you spoke to the larger context And for the persons we see, how there can for them be a disconnect to who they are spiritually. And how can I help that person to connect to that? I can tell you what I do. I am frequently suggesting to people to connect with their culture, to learn of their ways, to find and speak with elders, how things used to be, how things are, what their ceremonies are, so that they can gain a sense of pride, not a boastful pride, but a sense of I'm good with myself, that kind of pride, and address the shame that has been imposed through colonization. I worry, and this is why I want to meet with you, I worry that some, certainly not all, of my colleagues look at things too superficially, too behaviorally, and it doesn't get to the core of this person's experience that generates the issues that they're grappling with. I like to have difficult, in a sense, and profound conversations with particularly with the Indigenous persons that I work with. We talk about this stuff. I you've just pricked so many things for me to talk about, think about. Pat Green, native elder. Can I call you a knowledge keeper?
I prefer that as opposed to elder.
Okay, knowledge keeper. Thank you. I so cherish our friendship. I really, really do. And I want to thank you, really thank you, for agreeing to have this conversation today.
Well, I got to admit that I found it a bit scary to to expose not just myself but my people. That number one, when I do talk about our people, I can only talk about my own personal experience. I know other Mohawks have seen do things differently, and I totally respect that. That I'm not a wampum carrier who's carrying the words of the people, but I'm just somebody who carries my own words, and I think that's really important for us to remember. I can't speak on behalf of Mohawks, Cubis, Senecas, Onondagas, etc. I just can only talk from my own experience. And I appreciate that you can bring that out and make me feel a bit more comfortable with that. Again, I have to remind you that we both met when we were both naked, and I'm okay with that.
There it is, folks. Or are they going to wonder?
Stay tuned. There's more to come.
Oh.
But thanks for the opportunity. I find it healthy for myself to be able to talk about these things, come in my own mind, come in my own self, and I really appreciate it. I'm glad that you have learned to comb your own hair. I really appreciate that. But I just wish that other people could do the same thing, including my own people, because we're carrying a lot of prejudices back and forth, and we're carrying a lot of fears back and forth. And you know, righteous or not, we have to be responsible with our behaviors that are stimulated by our emotions and our thinking. And I think that's what this is all about. And if we can do that for ourselves, then we can be a true helper. Again, you can only take people as far as you fit. And we've had a lot of sick people try to guide our people. And when you look back at the church, you look back at all those things that have affected our people, they were very sick people that were in power. So we have to remember that. And we have to remember from the Aboriginal perspective that not all non-Aboriginal people are that way.
Hmm.
So when I ask people to look within themselves and look at their own background, I have to acknowledge their background, that originally you came from a very healthy society. And I'm not placing any blame, but the truth is that the colonization has affected the whole world, it has affected all relationships. We don't have to let it happen.
Pat, I'm going to bring us to a close. I'm going to stop recording in a moment. I just want to let folks who are listening, watching our conversation, if you've enjoyed this, if you've found this helpful, if you think it could be of value to someone else, please share this video. And Pat, again, thank you ever so much.
Thanks for acknowledging my existence. I love it.